Question number 6. Which of the following occurs directly because the breeze is desultory in line 14? The footnote will certainly help you with this one. You'll need to read it to see that the lute in the passage is an instrument that the wind blows through to make a sound. Also, if you don't know the meaning of the word desultory, that would give you problems here. This is a good example of a question where vocabulary is really important. Desultory means having no plan or purpose or enthusiasm, and so the wind going back and forth through the lute without plan or purpose would not be evenly sustained, and so the music would not be evenly sustained on the harp. So the correct answer is B. The music of the harp is not evenly sustained. Question number 7. The speaker's description of the sound of the lute emphasizes all of the following except its what? Notice that this is an except question, so you're looking for which of these answers don't apply. If we look at the passage, we can see that there's a reference to the breeze or lover caressing the coy maiden. That's a seductive, sensuous thing, so we can eliminate seductiveness and sensuousness. Then we have it pouring such sweet upbraiding, delicious surges, and melodies round honey-dropping flowers, so we can eliminate sweetness. We also have the lute making witchery of sound like twilight elfins make when they come from fairyland, and so we can cross out A, magical quality. What we don't have is remoteness. Nothing about the description of the sound of the lute suggests that it's far off or distant or unlikely. So the correct answer is C, remoteness. Question number 8. In lines 32 through 33, the mute still air through the word instrument suggests the what? So the lines in question read, where the breeze warbles and the mute still air is music slumbering on her instrument. And we're focused on what's suggested by the part that reads, and the mute still air is music slumbering on her instrument. This is another question where it's helpful to have read the footnote and know how the instrument works, that the wind blowing across it or through it is the way this lute makes music. So what does this particular part of the poem suggest? Let's look at the answers. A. Music cannot exist while the air remains still. This might sound like a good answer considering the way the lute works, but the question asks what the lines are suggesting, and while it might be true that the lute doesn't make music when the air is still, that's not the same thing as saying music cannot exist while the air remains still. There could be other music. So while this answer might give you pause, remember to look through all the answers before you choose one, because there's certainly a better one in this case. B. The sound of the lute makes the speaker drowsy. No, music is what's slumbering here. These lines don't suggest that the speaker is drowsy. Cross out B. C. Air itself contains potential music. This is good. The mute, still air is music slumbering, so when the breeze blows, when it's no longer mute and still, it will awake to be music. The mute, still air then is potential music, and C is a good answer. D. Lute can make music even without the breeze. Nothing in this clause suggests that. Music is slumbering when the air is mute and still, so the lute isn't making music without the breeze. Cross out D. E. Sound of the lute can make the air itself mute. No, this is not suggested at all. The mute still air is music slumbering on her instrument. Music is not causing the air to be mute and still, so E won't work. And the best answer is C. Air itself contains potential music. Question number 9. In line 38, tranquil functions as which of the following? This is a grammar question, and we're going to spend a little time with it. Let me preface this explanation by saying that you might find this type of question to be one of the more difficult types of questions that you encounter on an exam. This question is really testing your ability to read and comprehend very complicated texts by analyzing the sentence structure carefully and competently. Don't be discouraged if you miss this kind of question to start with. The good news is that you can get to the point where you can knock this out with your mad grammar and reading comprehension skills. It takes reading and practice, but it's definitely worth it. Not just for the sake of passing a test, but for the world of literature that it opens up to you. Okay, let's get started. First of all, in order to answer this question without just guessing, you need to know your parts of speech. If you don't know them really well, you definitely want to spend some time with them and get really comfortable with identifying them in sentences. This type of question is also easier to answer if you know enough about grammar and sentence structure to change the syntax of the sentence. Syntax, in case you've forgotten, refers to the order in which words are arranged in a sentence. As always, the more developed your vocabulary, the easier it is to understand what you read. Knowing what all the words mean in a sentence and knowing that some words have multiple meanings, even though they're spelled and pronounced the same, is important too. You can't use a dictionary on the AP exam, of course, but that's all the more reason to use it all the time, the rest of the time. You'll be building up your vocabulary every time you read. So, parts of speech. As a reminder to get you started on this question, adjectives modify nouns and noun phrases and pronouns. Adverbs modify verbs, adjectives, or other adverbs. In our everyday speech, modifying words very often appear next to the word which they modify. For example, if I'm describing my car to you, I would probably say, I drive a red Volkswagen Beetle. But I wouldn't have to say it that way. I could say, a Beetle I drive, red, and from the company Volkswagen. This would not be incorrect. It would just sound silly in everyday talking, and it wouldn't be what you expected. However, if you read it in a poem, it might not sound so strange. For another example, I might say something like, my childhood was happy, and that would be the structure you expect. If I said, happy was my childhood, it would also be correct, but that syntax would not be what you would expect me to use in everyday conversation. If I said, I didn't sleep at all last night, and now I sit at my computer exhausted, that wouldn't seem very unusual. But I could also say, I slept not at all this night past, and now exhausted sit at my computer. This passage from the poem is an example of that last type of exception, where the syntax, word order, is very different from what you probably expect, unless you've spent a lot of time reading literature that employs it. If you treat this passage and the question you're asked as if the syntax of the passage is what you typically expect in everyday speech, you'll likely choose one of the incorrect answers. There are two in your answer choices that are designed to distract you and find out if you really understood the sentence's structure. So back to this passage. This entire passage is really one sentence. The sentence structure is not one we use commonly in everyday speech. If we change the syntax or word order of the sentence, it can go something like this. And so, my love, as I stretch my limbs at noon on the midway slope of yonder hill, while through my half-closed eyes I behold the sunbeams dance like diamonds on the main, and muse tranquil on tranquility, many uncalled and undetained thoughts and many idle flitting fantasies traverse my indolent and passive brain, as wild and various as the random gales that swell and flutter on this subject lute. It's still a rather complicated sentence, but the syntax, at least, is closer to our everyday speech. Now, if we trim the extra descriptive information out of this sentence, we have a simpler sentence. As I stretch my limbs and muse, tranquil on tranquility, thoughts and fantasies traverse my brain. And we can rearrange that syntax to be even more straightforward. Thoughts and fantasies traverse my brain as I stretch my limbs and muse, tranquil on tranquility. So now let's look at the answer choices. We can see that tranquil is how the speaker describes himself as he stretches and muses on tranquility. So tranquil is an adjective modifying I, and the correct answer is A. Question number 10. In lines 34 through 43, the speaker compares what? A, the midpoint of his life to noon. We don't have any reason to think he's talking about the midpoint of his life here, so eliminate A. B, his thoughts to the ocean. There's no mention of the ocean in this passage, so cross out B. C, his muse to a sunbeam. He's not comparing his muse to a sunbeam because if you closely examine this sentence with the word muse in it, you'll see that this is the verb muse, which means to think about, rather than the noun muse, which means a source of inspiration. So if you look for the bones of this sentence, leaving out the prepositional phrases and other words that supply additional information, and adding the understood I, you'll see that what the speaker says here is, I stretch my limbs while I behold the sunbeams dance, and I muse upon tranquility. So the speaker is not comparing his muse to a sunbeam and eliminates C. D, his muse to tranquility. He's not comparing his muse to tranquility for the same reason. He is musing upon or about tranquility, not comparing something to it. E, his brain to the lute. Yes, what he's doing is comparing his brain to the lute. He says, and many idle flitting fantasies traverse my indolent and passive brain, as wild and various as the random gales that swell and flutter on this subject lute. The speaker is saying that his thoughts and idle flitting fantasies are as wild and varied as the random gales, or music caused by the wind, that the harp or the lute plays. Since he's comparing his thoughts to the music of the lute, by extension, he's comparing his brain to the lute itself. So the correct answer is E.